Randy Robb is the author of this book, Two Roads, One Man's Journey from Drug Lord to Salvation. And he's a man with a history and a gripping story. Welcome, Randy. Great to have you with us. It really is. It's hard to know where to start, but let's start with what you call the gateway drug, marijuana. How young were you, and why did you get involved with marijuana in the first place?
Very simply, Jim, it was peer pressure. Out with a group of kids. Really, we just left, playing hockey to running the roads, and somebody introduced marijuana to us, and that was just, I came from a family of alcoholics and drug addicts, so it was sort of a natural progression for me. I have a very addictive personality, I know that, and it took no time at all for me to fit right into the marijuana using crowd in my school.
You were just a teenager at the time?
13.
13. How long from then till starting harder drugs?
Well, by the time I was 15 years old, I took my first needle.
Really?
15.
Heroin?
Speed.
Speed.
But anything you could put in a needle, I did.
Now, when you're 15 years of age and you're buying speed, or eventually you're getting cocaine and other drugs, you got to pay for it. How did you generate the income to pay for these drugs when you were a teenager?
I was at a party one evening, and an older, and I say older, maybe 25, 30 year old drug dealer was at the party, and he saw something in me. He invited me to his house and really sat me on his couch and gave me my first needle. And Jim, without a word of a lie, from that day forward, I knew in my heart drugs would kill me. I knew it, and I was happy about that. I was okay with it.
Were you depressed?
For decades.
It seems to me that depression's got to play a role in all of this. I mean,
it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Kind of a bleak worldview, a sense of hopelessness, sense of just not quite being on top of things.
Yep. No real sense of purpose. School held nothing for me. I had a wonderful childhood in some ways, but in other ways, I mean, for me to grow up watching my parents drink themselves to death, I believe affected me. I believe there's, genealogy in that as well. Mm-hmm. But drugs were a real outlet for me. They made me who I was.
When did you start dealing?
Shortly after I had taken my first needle, this drug dealer wanted to sort of stay one step away from the police trouble, the streets. So he would just shovel his drugs to me, and I would sell them.
And then you would take your cut and pay him, and
you bet.
And that's how you supported your own drug habit.
By the time I was 17 years old, I was introduced to somebody in a bike gang in Toronto, and he, of course, saw something in me. By this time, I was hard. At 17 years old, I started selling drugs for a bike gang, and for the next 3 years, I sold almost $8 million worth of drugs and put $1.2 million worth of drugs through my body in 3 years.
Oh, it's a wonder you're alive.
God has a purpose.
That can be a throwaway line, God has a purpose. But that really means something to you.
Oh, to me
Now tell me why. How is it that you became aware of God and His purpose and His love for you and His plan for your life?
Well, that took a long time for me to come to realize. After taking drugs for 17 years, at 30 years of age, I was on the verge of throwing another marriage away, complete with a young daughter. And she had mentioned to me that I either get help or get out. So I went to rehab, and a wonderful place in Guelph. Can I mention?
Sure.
A place called Homewood.
Yep.
And in 28 days, I came out an absolutely changed person. Now that can only be God. Yeah. I went in there he literally pulled me out of the depths of hell. In 28 days, I was an absolutely changed person. I began going into a 12-step program, Narcotics Anonymous. Loved it, became a pillar in that organization. I spoke in schools. I sponsored countless people. Took many, many people to their first meetings, spoke at meetings, birthdays, police conventions, teachers' conventions, and got married again. Now, that wife began to use alcohol to excess, and she became toxic. We ended up getting a divorce, and I moved to Barrie. When I was in Barrie, the first thing I did was seek out NA, because that had been my cross, my pillar, my strength. I was in a meeting in the basement of a church, Mapleview Community Church, and two members of the church were also members of Narcotics Anonymous. They pulled me aside after a meeting, and they had told me, "Randy, we know you're not done. We know you're still searching. Why don't you come on upstairs? Just try it for one Sunday." And I'm an old rock and roller. They told me they had a lead guitar upstairs. So I thought, why not? I was searching. I was searching.
And you'd been clean for about 10 years at this point,
10 years.
Right? Yeah.
Went up on Sunday, and God's a funny God. He's a funny God. He sat me in the front row, and the words came up on the screen, and I began to cry.
The words meaning the words for the songs?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't remember the words, Jim. I don't remember, and forgive me, Pastor Jay, I don't remember a word he said. I cried for the entire service. Jay, of course, seen me.
Now, you're a tough drug dealer, and you're weeping through this service. Are you saying to yourself, am I losing it here? Is there something wrong here? Or were you aware that something deep was going on? Or all